In the winter of 1957, when newspapers were still arriving warm from the presses and every radio seemed to be whispering the same impossible news, a young technician named Elias joined a quiet government archive built inside an old observatory hill. His job was simple on paper: sort reports, labels, and recordings from the earliest age of space research. In practice, he was guarding the memory of a race that had only just begun. The archive smelled of dust, ink, and machine oil. On one shelf were sketches of rockets that looked more like fireworks than vehicles. On another were pages covered in calculations so dense they seemed like coded prayers. Elias spent his evenings listening to scratched audio reels from the first artificial satellites. He heard engineers cheering at static, scientists speaking in careful voices. And somewhere beneath their discipline, a childlike amazement that had survived the war, the fear, and the arithmetic of gravity. One night, while filing a box marked loss and failure, Elias found a misfiled envelope with no sender. Inside was a single page from an early planner's notebook. It described a secret experiment, a tiny reflective sphere launched not to conquer space, but to prove that humans could place an object beyond the sky and still hear it answer back. At the bottom of the page, in a different hand, someone had written, "If this works, history will no longer be limited to the ground." The sentence unsettled him. He carried the page to the archive lamp and began tracing the chain of events it belonged to, moving backward through the years. The first rows of the story were about mathematics, balloon flights, and war-era rocketry. Then came the names that had become legends. The dreamers who turned equations into engines. The observers who watched the moon through lenses polished by patience. The teams who argued over fuel mixtures while the rest of the world barely believed the sky could be reached. As he read deeper, the account stopped feeling like a record and became a corridor. At one end stood fear, the old human habit of remaining on safe ground. At the other stood curiosity, stubborn and bright. Space research, he realized, had not begun with launch towers. It had begun with people refusing to accept that the visible world was the whole world. Months later, a
Which
museum
document
curator visited the
matters
archive
most?
and asked Elias which document mattered most. He brought out the envelope and placed it under the light.
The most important thing was not the satellite or even the rocket.
It was the moment before the first launch, when no one could know whether the dream would rise or burn. The curator smiled.
Why did that moment matter?
Because every stage of space research was built on that one decision: to treat uncertainty as a door instead of a wall.
Outside, the evening sky turned deep and metallic. Far beyond it, telescopes, probes, and stations would one day extend the work of those early years. But in the archive, among the paper records of impossible hopes, history stayed alive in a quieter form. It was not a straight line upward. It was a long conversation between Earth and everything waiting above it.